It's showtime. What's up, good people? And welcome to the Frank Harris Show, the biggest, the best, and the greatest show on earth. And guess who's back? Guess who's here? My guy, Dominican E. Yo, E, what's the words? E, what's the words? E.
Let's get to it. Let's get to it. Let's get to these hot topics. Let's get to it.
E, question, right? Out the gate, we're going to kick it with this, E. So you always hear about players telling stories and speaking negatively about GMs and how, they found out about trades from their agents or through the trade wire, or quite often a GM told me he wasn't going to trade me, but he did trade me, and all these types of stories you hear about players. And it got me to thinking, E, what do GMs owe players when it as it relates to transactions in your thoughts? I have a lot of thoughts about it, E, but let me get yours. What do GMs owe players as it relates to trades and transactions?
I think the GMs owe the players a sit down. That's number one. As a player, you never want to find out you're getting traded on Twitter or during practice or things like that, because when you get traded, it's not just yourself. Some of these guys are married; they have to move their whole family now. So, I think that the GM should have a sit down with some of these guys and let them know that, listen, we're trading you to this team. If there's anything we could do to make that transition easier for you from moving from city to city or state to state, make that transition easier for them. And I think that it should be dealt with in a professional manner. I shouldn't have to find out on Twitter that I'm getting traded. Like, come on, we're talking about professional athletes, with families, So that's my take on it.
Are you out of your mind? What a joke! What a joke! Guys are making $200 million and you got to tell them, you got to keep placating them and babying them. Let me tell you why that's a bunch of malarkey, a bunch of garbage.
Come on,
Let me
Frank.
tell you why. First of all, a lot of times, GMs may come to a player and say that we're not going to trade you, and that may be your intention. But guess what? In the midst of trade season, in the midst of transaction season, you may get a phone call like that from another GM, and it's a trade that you can't resist, right? I can't then say, oh, hold on, I got to fly in Eric from wherever he's at and have a sit down with him to tell him we trading him. Sometimes this is what happens, number one. Number two, bro, these guys are making hundreds of millions of dollars a year, okay? I understand we feel bad, there's some family element, and I get it. But realistically speaking, dogs, this is the world that we live in. And let me ask you this question. When you say that, what happens when players decide to leave teams? Like when LeBron James left to go to Miami. And he did 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7, right? I don't think that he had to sit down with the Cavs before he made that move. Players make decisions with free agency all the time.
Hold on, Frank. You pointed out LeBron James. LeBron James and the general manager and the upper executives, they were going through some stuff. There was some friction going on. So LeBron doesn't have to go to. If I'm having friction with somebody, I don't have to go to them and explain to them why I'm leaving. Right now, if it's a professional setting, yes, you should have a sit down and discuss and say, listen.
So hold on. So even if Eric, you're contradicting yourself. Even if it's a professional setting, even if there's friction, professionally you do it the right way from your perspective, right? So even if there's friction, so what? You can't say even if there's friction professionally, you should then do from your perspective, right? I don't think any of these people owe each other anything personally, but you feel like you can't say on one breath, if in a professional setting you got to be a professional. Even if there's friction, you should be professional. So LeBron James, because there was friction, didn't owe him the respect to tell him he was leaving because there was friction. Friction.
Well, we don't know. We wasn't privy to that conversation whether they spoke or not. I'm just saying it should be a conversation held. I shouldn't find out on Twitter I'm getting traded. No, I shouldn't find out. Listen, text my agent.
Comes along the territory, bro.
No. Text my agent. Anything can contact me. Somehow it has to be.
Well, you said no.
Has to.
And you told me you don't want to hear from your agent, Eric. Eric, you told me you don't want to hear from your agent either. You said that too. You said my agent shouldn't be calling me and telling me not. You switching up too much.
But
You
I'm
also
saying
said your
if they
agent should
can't
not be the
contact
one
me,
telling you.
if they can't contact me directly, call my agent. Call my agent, and let my agent tell me. Come on, Frank. That's wrong.
Oh.
That's wrong. You can't do that, Frank. That's wrong.
So Eric, I have a question. Right? I didn't. Okay, trade deadline is approaching. This happens all the time. Coach, a GM may say, "Look, I don't intend on trading you at the trade deadline." You get a phone call, right? Everybody's making phone calls at the trade deadline, trying to improve their team, trying to get some things before you be getting to try to make a final playoff run. Okay, a deal opportunity presents itself on a call that I'm having with right a contemporary, another GM. Am I not going to do that deal because I'm concerned about
No,
notifying the player
different,
first?
Frank. That's different, Frank. Hold on.
How's that different?
Wait, hold on. Now, if let's say we know the trading deadline is such date, right? And now you say certain players are on the chopping blocks as far as getting traded. Now I'm aware of that. So now I'm aware. My name is on the list of maybe possibly getting traded. I'm aware.
No,
of that.
but maybe you're not. No, Eric, but you didn't answer my question. You can't say that's different, right? You said they always owe the player, the agent or the player, the call. What I'm saying to you is the trade deadline is today. I did not intend on trading you as a player. I'm on a call with one of my contemporaries, and we have and it's a trade that we both want to make at that point. Do I tell them to hold on until I call the player or sit down with the player? It wasn't my intention to trade you, but things happen.
At that point, you make the trade. All I'm saying, after that, you go make that necessary phone call. And you sit that man down and say, "Listen, a trade came up. We couldn't resist it. We traded you." That's what I'm saying. After that trade is done, you have to sit down with that player and say, "Listen, my intention was not to trade you, but a trade came up that we couldn't resist, and we traded you." That's all I'm saying.
But at that point, the trade is over. That's not what you're saying. At that point, the cat is out the bag. What do you mean? You consummate a trade, right? Woj is going to know that before anybody else. The cat is out the bag at that point. So your idea of sitting down with me, telling me first you're going to trade me and having all these conversations, right now I'm showing you that a lot of times that's just not plausible. The cat is out the bag after the trade is made. At that point, you will find out on Twitter anyway. At that point, the cat is out the bag, Eric.
So I'm having dinner with my family, and now the ticker comes up or Twitter sign, "Oh, such and such has just been traded." How am I supposed to explain that to my family? No. Them GMs owe them players an explanation,
Eric,
phone call, something. No way.
I'm not happening, Frank. You're contradicting yourself. You're saying they owe them an explanation before they make a trade. 2 minutes ago, you said they can make a trade without giving them an explanation. No, you're contradicting yourself, bro.
No. I never come to my.
You said before. Eric, you said before you make a trade, you should tell the player.
No, I said once the trade is made.
You said before you make a trade, Eric, you should tell the player. You said that. Before you make a trade, you owe it to the player to tell him. You said that. Now you're switching up.
No, once the trade is made.
No, you did say that.
Okay, maybe I did say that. I'm saying once the trade is made, I should have to find out on Twitter. Call me.
Eric, most teams do that, Eric. Most teams, after a trade is made, do make the call to the player or the agent. So what you're saying is something different. This is not we're talking about what you owe. I guarantee you, even the issue that players have is listen, this is the issue. When coaches say when GMs say we're not going to make a trade, right? Okay. GMs make that statement, right? And then players get traded. Then players say the GM looked at me and said he wasn't going to make a trade, and he traded me. Okay? Yeah. My point is, it happens, Eric. You ever heard of something called occupational hazard? It's part of the terrain. When you're a basketball player, this is an occupational hazard you have to deal with in terms of moving your family, in terms of doing things. And by the way, I guarantee you, 99% of the time, when a team makes a trade, they do call a player afterwards. The point is, at that point, the player is already traded. That's the issue. Of course, they call the player after the trade. So right now, so you're saying before a trade is consummated. So let me ask you a question. Hold on. Before a trade is consummated, I ask you, does a team have an obligation to notify a player that they're going to make a trade for them before the trade is consummated?
Before the trade is consummated? Yes, I think they should.
You keep contradicting yourself. You just said they don't have to. You just said a few minutes ago.
Right.
You said after.
After,
You're a walking
before,
contradiction
after,
today.
before, during, they should call the player. Yes. Yes.
They
During,
always do it after.
okay,
Eric,
after,
they
that's
do
fine.
it.
During, call them. Before, call them. All that. Yes. Call them. Yes. Whatever, everything.
Eric,
Before the trade is made, you call them. We're looking to trade you. After the trade is made, you call them and say, we just traded you. Yes. That's what I'm agreeing to. That's what they owe the players that.
Eric, there's a substantial difference, right, of informing a player he's been traded before trade to tell the players, hey, you're on a trading block. There's a possibility that we'll trade you, so be prepared for that. That's one scenario, okay? After a trade is consummated, I'm sure. Hold on. After a trade is consummated, I'm sure every team tells the player, bro. So what are you talking about? There's no team that trades a player and hold on. There's no team in the world that trades a player and then after they trade the player, right, not communicate with the agent or the player.
Of course.
That never happens. So what are you talking about?
Finding that on Twitter when guys find out on Twitter on a ticker. So why guys find out on a ticker saying, "Oh, this guy's been traded"? That means there was no communication involved.
Eric, I never heard about guys finding out they got traded on Twitter very often without their agent not knowing or without an agent being called.
Have you heard of it though? Have you heard of that?
Yeah, and I think in scenarios like that, there's two things that happen. Okay, I don't think any team intends that to happen. I think a team may call an agent, and it may take an agent some time to get to a player. Number one, or I think quite often when trades get consummated, right, one team may run to Woj, right, who's the insider, who is annoying that he's the insider. But anyway, that's a whole nother story.
How does he get the information before the player? That's crazy to me. But go ahead.
Let me tell you why. Because there are two teams in the transaction, correct?
Yes.
So maybe you didn't tell Woj, but maybe the other team told Woj.
I guess.
Right? And then Woj puts the information out, and your intent is you calling the player's on vacation somewhere, you calling an agent, and you can't get them, and the trade is out. I'm sure, Eric, no team trades a player and has no communication with the player. Yo, come on, bro. Stop. You know better than that.
Frank,
stop.
Listen.
Stop. And by the way, it's two different dynamics to call afterwards and to call before. Most players expect the call before. That's what most players argue. Most players say, if you're going to trade me, tell me so I can prepare myself and prepare my family. Most players are not arguing that after you've traded me, tell me. They're arguing, tell me before. They're arguing, don't tell me you're not going to trade me and then at the trade deadline, trade me. That's what most people are arguing. Not the foolishness you're arguing.
The two scenarios.
But most players don't argue. Call me afterwards. Most players don't say that, Eric. Stop it. So anyway, what do GMs owe players? Occupational hazard. You're going to get traded. I don't think GMs owe players anything. The GM's obligation is to make his basketball team better, and that means what it means. And same thing, when players, it goes the other way. Players go on recruiting trips, even in the NBA, okay? You sit down with your player, season's in, they tell you, yeah, I'm going to re-sign with you, but let me talk to some other teams. They go to the Golden State Warriors, Kevin Garnett. They go to the Miami. You go to these places, then all of a sudden, they sign with this team, okay? They sign with this team quite often, and they don't tell their team. It happens both ways. So realistically, you guys are all making a whole bunch of money. Deal with it. Deal with it. So anyway, E, let's switch gears, E.
Come on, Frank. Wait a minute.
Let's switch gears. Let's switch gears, E. Okay, let's talk a little boxing today. Okay, we talked, GM obligation, play obligation, etc. Let's talk a little boxing, Eric. So there's a lot of talk going on right now that the Saudi Investment Fund, which is investing in everything, as we know, Live Golf, they brought a lot of events to Saudi to make Saudi more of a tourist destination place. But the Saudis have been very active in boxing lately. A lot of big boxing super fights have been in Saudi, right? Tyson Fury quite often, who was the heavyweight champion, fights in Saudi. And then now, supposedly, the fund is potentially going to put up $5 billion to buy a lot of the top boxing promoters. Okay, they're talking about Eddie Hearn, obviously DAZN. They're talking about Golden Boy. They're talking about Top Rank potentially, PBC, and they're talking about buying all of the different promoters and consolidating boxing more comparable to what's happening with the UFC, right? Where all of the better fighters, all of the fighters for the most part, are all a part of the UFC, which, boxing has been very splintered as of late because of the different promoters and fighters not fighting fighters, etc. So either you think it's a good idea for all of boxing to come under one kind of umbrella, as the UFC is, from a competitive perspective, from a making fights perspective, from an economic perspective, or do you like the current model where different promoters promote different fighters?
No, I like it under one umbrella.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
Okay.
under one umbrella. Because if you had the one umbrella, then
Uh
these
huh.
fights would happen, right? We talk about the Shakur Stevenson and the Tank, right? They're both under different promotion companies. So I think that if it's under one umbrella, that they'll make these mega fights happen. I mean, boxing has taken a very, very, decline as far as the popularity as a sport as a whole because of the fights not being made. You know, back in the day, they used to have, maybe one or two promoters and they will make mega fights happen, right? So now with so many promoters, you got Golden Boy, you got what's Al
Right,
Haymon,
the zone. You
so
got PBC, right? Just Heyman. You got Al Heyman's company.
you got
You
Top
got
Rank,
Matchroom.
yeah. So you got all these promoters, you know,
Yep.
fighting against each other, and the fights are never, never come to an agreement, right? Whether it's money involved, whether the split is wrong, the purse, they want 50-50, they want the other promoters want 70-30. So it's a lot involved in that. When it's under one umbrella, they can all come to an agreement and make these huge fights happen. I think that, yes, I'm agreeing with the Saudis coming in and making it one umbrella, and seeing, as a fan, seeing these mega fights happen, because that's what the public eye wants to see, these mega fights.
Right. So I think boxing has taken a significant hit because it's splintered. I think it's been splintered by the promoters and also with so many different
Hey, hold on,
belts,
hold
right?
on, Frank, hold on. You kill me with these words. Split. What's the word, Frank?
Which
What's the word
one?
you just used? Splint. What's the word?
Splintered.
Splintered. Okay. I just want to make
Yeah,
my
come on.
vocabulary not good as yours.
My vocabulary is unbelievable,
Just want to
right?
make
Come on,
sure,
bro.
Frank. I want to make
But
sure.
but but no, but I think the sport has been splintered, and I think a lot of it is with the promoters. A lot of it is with all the different belts, right? Either as a WBA, a WBC, a IBF, and they have all these different belts,
Yeah,
and they
that's
have
another
all these
thing. All
different
these
promoters,
belts, all these
and the
different
fights are
belts.
not being made. And I think because of that, that's allowed the UFC to sneak in, right, and gain substantial popularity. Some people feel like the UFC has become more popular than boxing, and but this is the challenge, right? So some people condemn the UFC model as well because the UFC fighters have no say so in who they fight, right? So the UFC, they put the best fighters against each other and they make the fights, and the fighters have no say so. So Conor McGregor can't decide who he wants to fight, and this fighter over here can't decide who he wants to fight. They just make the fights. So ultimately, you do get when they make the fights, um, the best fights being made, right, in the UFC. But they also control the money, right? How the players are getting paid as well. That's too.
Yes.
So ultimately, in this new dynamic, potentially the Saudi fund will be similar, where they make the fights, right, and they control the purses. Okay, so while it may be good for the fans, boxers are independent contractors to a degree. So as independent contractors with boxers, I want to maybe be able to still make my fights and determine who I want to fight. Do I want to be like the UFC? Well, UFC makes the fights, right? And the UFC decides who you fight, and the UFC also determines the money that you can make, right? You see how much money Conor McGregor made, way more money when he was fighting Floyd Mayweather, when it was more of an open market in terms of how that was done than he would have done if it was UFC controlled, right?
Yeah.
So,
I don't think
so as
as
independent
far as the money,
contractors, is that better for the boxers?
I don't think that the UFC should control the money aspect. I think that the fighter should control that. I'm saying, I'm saying that, I'm saying that the UFC go under one umbrella. Yes, with the Saudis. Yes, but as far as the money that's concerned, that should be negotiated between the two camps. I think that's what they should do. To be controlled by the two camps, not the whole Saudi umbrella. No. It's my life on the line.
What what what
My
what,
life on the
what, what
line.
when you say when you say it's controlled by the two camps, right? Then then who makes the determination of if the fight gets made? If it's under one umbrella. So then that's if it's controlled by the two camps, if they can never come to an agreement, how does the fight get made if they can't do it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm just
I
saying.
mean, you're still gonna be in the same dynamic with fights are not being made.
Yeah.
And by the way, let me just say this, and as an aside, this issue of splintering again has completely almost nullified golf, right? If you look at Live and you look at how the Saudi fund again, they bought all these golfers to be a part of the Live tour, and now the Live tour and the PGA tour have splintered. Okay, and boxing is not strong enough a sport. Excuse me, not boxing. Golf is not strong enough a sport to have splintered leagues, right? You have two different leagues. The players are playing in different tournaments every week. Some in Live, some at the PGA. So the sport has significantly declined and suffered because of it, right? And I feel like the same thing is with boxing. I just feel like you have to be careful, because the good thing about being a boxer is that you're an independent contractor and you have a chance to decide what promoter you want to work for. And you have a chance to decide how you make your own fights and who you want to fight. And so while I agree more fights would be made if it was one unified body together, similar to UFC, I think a lot of UFC fighters are unhappy with the purses, the money they make for the fights, and the fact that they can't determine who they fight. And so it's a very slippery slope in terms of going down that road in boxing. Maybe there's a balance to be struck. I do like the idea of it being of the fights being made, but also want to be very conscientious of boxers being able to determine their own fate, make the fights they want to make themselves, and make whatever money they can make their own deals, right? In terms of pay-per-view and money that they can make, right? It's not capped, okay, like it is in the UFC.
What about all these federations, all these belts? I think they need to get rid of all these belts. Just have maybe one or two belts. Now they got the WBO. The IBF always been around. IBF, WBC, and WBA, and they got all these other belts. Intercontinental champions. Like,
Right.
get rid of all these belts and just have one champion for every weight class. That's it.
Right, a linear champion.
Yes.
A linear champion.
Come on, all these they got the DBB belt. Come on, man.
I'm with you on that. You have a linear champion, right, with one belt. And by the way, if this happened, right, with the Saudi fund, I'm sure there would probably be a more linear belt, similar to what you find in the UFC, and you wouldn't have all that this other kind of nonsense where everything's all over the place. So anyway, E, interesting situation. Let's see how it progresses. $5 billion is supposedly the number being thrown around of what it would take to buy off a lot of these big promoters, which is big, big money. But they print money in Saudi anyway, so it's no problem at all, baby. And money talk and everything else walk, E. Money talk and everything else walk. So, all right, E, well, listen. As always, it's been real. Two great topics, obviously, today. The Saudi fund, obviously, and what do GMs owe to players and their families. E, as you know, at the very end of the show, we always give you an opportunity to shout out your Dominican brothers and sisters achieving and doing well in society. E, so the floor is yours. Who you want to shout out?
Since we're talking boxing, no, I mean, I know he represented Puerto Rico. He represented Puerto Rico, and that, but I'm gonna go with Felix Trinidad, one of my favorite boxers. I think it's one of his grandmothers, is Dominican or something like that. So I'm gonna go with Felix Trinidad. Great fighter back in his day. Under Don King. Beat Oscar De La Hoya. In a huge fight.
Questionable, by the way. Questionable, but okay. When he beat De La Hoya, De La Hoya won the fight and started running, and he got penalized for that, right? But he definitely outscored him. But anyway, Trinidad was a great fighter, though.
Yeah, so
that first De La Hoya fight, E, questionable, excuse me.
Yeah, and right? I know he's going through some difficult times right now, so I just want to give a shout out to Felix Trinidad.
Cool. Love. All right, E, well, listen, it's real. It's been real as always. You understand what I'm saying? We'll do it again soon.
All right.
We out.
We out of here.
Love.